Yeah, there are a couple of comments I'd like to write you about.
I can tell I'm among friends in here.
I confess I'm April Gillespie's predecessor in Iraq, but I have some thoughts on it I'd like to send you. But my real question is to draw on the previous question, but also your comment about some very good Arab historians come along. Do you find any places in the Arab world where they can write, or are they still all going to the UK and the United States and other countries?
I'm quite pleased to say that, and again, this is another interesting thing about going to the Abu Dhabi Book Fair. It's very good to get a sense of what's going on in the world of ideas and letters. And there's a great deal of serious intellectual life going on, and there are important research centers in the Gulf and in Egypt and in Lebanon to promote such activity. And no, I think that the scope for critical thought is alive and well. In a sense, regimes are very happy to let people put things in books because so few people buy them and read them.
Especially if they're
Yeah, well, or even in Arabic, though. I mean, I take your point. But certainly, Arab colleagues are writing very critical and very engaging things. And I'm glad to say that it looks to me as the world of ideas is alive and diverse in the Arab world. And again, it would be interesting through translation projects to perhaps bring some of that work to the attention of people in the West. It'd be, I think, very instructive for us to see what kind of thought is going on in the Arab perspective of the engagement with the postmodern age.
Hi. Well, you said that with this latest book, you wanted to sort of reach beyond your traditional academic audience. I get a sense that one topic that's become sort of popular among non-academics is that of like comparative rates of social or intellectual change in different parts of the world.
The rate of change.
Right, like Jared Diamond, for example. I'm wondering, is that a topic you're interested in, and how do you address it in your book, if at all?
It's a great topic. I didn't address it. I think that anybody who goes to, again, talking about the diversity of the Arab world, if we're talking about rate of change in terms of, urban fabric, certainly the countries of the Gulf are dizzying. And I often will sit down with, people in their 60s and 70s who have really witnessed the sand flats erupt into these concrete canyons to try and gauge what it has meant to live through such rapid change. And what do you recognize of yourself in your society? I think that's less of a problem in the central Middle Eastern states of the Levant, where I think the pace of change has been somewhat slower. But again, having grown up in Beirut and Cairo, when I go back to these cities now, I'm overwhelmed by how much has changed. I don't recognize Cairo anymore. Beirut, of course, there was that civil war which had its impact on the urban fabric. But, yeah, the rate of change is something quite dizzying. And I think that it would be something well worth approaching as a book-length project. But I really didn't address it to the extent that I would have liked to in my book. And I think it would have added something quite rich about the experience of being Arab in the late 20th and early 21st century. So that's a really good point.
And I think you can point to the media, the change in the media. In the 1990s, everybody watched one state-run television station. Right. 96, you had Al Jazeera. Today, you've got 400 satellite stations beaming around the Arab world.
Very true.
That speaks to the rate of change. Michael?
Michael Dunn, the Middle East Journal. You attributed the political stagnation to the role of the military in politics, which I would tend to agree with, but is that primarily a 20th century artifact from the coups of the 20th century, or is it something much deeper? Is it a legacy of the Mamluk era?
Gosh, I'd never thought of that possibility. It's really funny because, and I bring this out in the book, at the time of the 1880s Urabi revolt, the military men of the Mamluk elite did relate their activities to a kind of Mamluk resurgence. It's the last time I really saw reference to the Mamluks as a kind of ideal influencing military men and how they saw their political project. And this is something Urabi, as a native-born Egyptian, was struggling against. And he would say, those Mamluks who begrudge us native-born Egyptians. But I never saw that in 20th century political actors. I think it has a lot to do with the notion of a chain of command. That meant that when military men came into politics, they hadn't actually been trained in law or political institutions, and so they replicated their notion of authority in politics. Bear with me, I'm getting well over my neck here in terms of my own expertise. I'm not a political scientist. But in a sense, that unquestioning observance of the orders from above seemed to have characterized what made political institutions in the Arab world so hard to change. How does that explain what goes on in the monarchies? I think the monarchies represent a different vision of political stagnation. So I can't say that the same model holds for both. But certainly where you would have expected a parliamentary and constitutional life to have emerged in the aftermath of coups, we got these military men in, and their willingness to relinquish authority to other elected bodies or whatnot seemed to be zero.
Question?
Hey, Shai Hazkani from the Arab Studies at Georgetown. Dr. Rogan, I wanted to ask for your perspective on the emergence of quote-unquote Islamist forces in the 20th century, especially in its second half in the Arab world. Do you see this as just another venue for politics, as the Ba'ath maybe or other, or something with specific different characteristics, perhaps something that the West should engage with, perhaps emergence of civil society, or something else, something that should be repressed and put down because its future is not something that you see positively?
I look on the role of Islam in politics as neither positive nor negative. I think it just reflects the will of the people. And I think in trying to fight the will of the people, you're probably taking on a head-banging scenario. That for every attempt to try and discredit it or stop it, you only make it look more credible and legitimate. I think part of what makes Islamists so attractive is that they have assumed the anti-imperial critique that had once been the sort of monopoly of the communist parties of the region, the Arab nationalist parties of the region. And so our efforts to try and stop them from attaining power have not made the region more stable. And I think about the aftermath of, let's say, the cancellation of elections in Algeria, or the aftermath of the non-recognition of the Hamas government, as two examples where truly important destabilization has resulted. That will be very hard to remedy. Algeria seems to be coming out of its troubles, but with the emergence of Al-Qaeda in North Africa, I'm sure that there's a lot of the same actors that were continuing to destabilize Algeria. And how are we ever going to try and get into meaningful negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians so long as the Palestinians are a divided authority? So, the results of trying to stop the Islamists in politics has been, I think, quite unfortunate. Does that mean that all Islamists are equally good and should be allowed equal sway? Well, again, it's not for us to determine. And I think that it's going to be the challenge of the secularists in the region, and they are legion. It is a mistake, I think, that we all make by our obsession with Islam and politics, that we no longer take seriously the secular forces at work in the Arab world today. We are still dealing with an Arab world that is overwhelmingly secular in its institutions, and I would argue in the political outlook of the majority of its populations. But the secular challenge is to come back into the battle of the political field with better ideas.